Repairer of the Breech, a short story by Steve Simmons. Jack studied the two humans in the ruins below it. They were such clumsy creatures as they scrambled over the moss and vine-covered ruins, searching for an entrance. It was hard to understand how such creatures could ever be the dangerous threat they truly were. Humans like these had hunted Jack's people almost to the point of extinction. It had made a vow to bring a stop to the humans as a threat, at least on this island. The humans had almost reached the first trap, so it slid down from its vantage point. It would still be able to hear their screams once they set off the trap. After that, all it had to do was make sure they were dead, then make sure the trap was reset. It was halfway down the hidden stairs in the ruins of its clan's ancestral home when it heard a yell of surprise, followed by a scream of pain and pure agony. When it emerged from a hidden stone wall panel inside the ruins, it found a human trying to crawl as it whimpered and cried in pain. The other human was nowhere to be seen. It surmised that when the tilt trap floor had tipped down, dumping one human into the hidden pit, the second one had tried to jump on the lifting stone to pull it down, to save the first human. Once the first human fell with its weight off, the stone had quickly dropped back into place, scissoring the second human's feet off at the ankles as the stone fell back into place. This was the human who was now crawling in pain back towards the way they had entered, leaving a trail of blood from the stumps of broken bones where its ankles once were. Jack took out its blowgun and shot a poisoned dart into the back of the crawling human's head. It began to convulse, then it went still. Its breathing stopped. It retrieved the dart and placed it back into a holder. It looked down on the dead human. They seemed such weak creatures and not overly bright. Killing them and putting them out of their pain and misery was the kindest thing that could be done for them. It removed the human's crossbow weapon and quiver, setting them to one side. It then went to one of several stone creature carvings on the wall and reached inside the mouth to relock the trap. Something seemed wrong. The trap would not relock. It assumed that some item of debris was in the way, so it returned to the dead human and dragged the corpse to the edge of the tilt trap. It then picked up the corpse and hurled it out onto the trap. The trap began to rise as the corpse slowly began to slide down the slope towards the pit below. As the stone slab lifted, it quickly checked the locking port on the stone's edge. Sure enough, there was a fragment of a human foot clogging the locking port. It quickly cleaned it out as the stone continued to lift, and the corpse slowly slid into the pit at the far end. This allowed the stone to settle quickly back into its horizontal position. It now returned to the creature carving and relocked the trap. It was amusing that these humans had found the locking trigger, but since it was already locked, they had unlocked it, not knowing which position of the copper rod inside the mouth of the carving was locked and which was unlocked. Jack picked up the crossbow weapon and quiver of bolts and walked across the locked tilt trap to the stone door at the far end. The stone door was recessed in an ornately carved stone alcove. A large gilded bronze disc formed the lock in the center of the stone door. Standing back outside of the stone door alcove, it reached in as far as it could and turned the disc. 3 spring-loaded bronze spears thrust into the door alcove, opening from amidst the carvings of the alcove walls. It smiled. Anyone standing in the alcove to open the door would be speared in the side by the 3 spears. Jack then moved to a corner and opened a secret, hidden stone panel in the stone wall, turned a crank that retracted the spears back into place. It then oiled the gears of the crank and closed the stone panel. Returning to the bronze door lock, it adjusted the dials on the bronze disc into the correct unlocked position and opened the stone door. The passage beyond was in total darkness. It took its gonvalo out of a bag. The light was a clear, bright white like the sun. The now illuminated passage revealed an empty stone entry platform, followed by a set of descending stone steps. Kneeling at the top edge of the stairway, it leaned forward and touched the second step. It rotated forward with ease. The movement caused the 2 steps below to also tilt down at the same time. In conjunction, a dozen bronze spikes raised up from holes in the landing stone at the base of the stairway. Anyone stepping on the second step would be thrown off balance and fall headlong down the stairs and onto the now raised spikes at the base of the stairs. Korjajak smiled to itself. Perfect, it said under its breath. Lifting the second step back into place, there was a faint, soft click. The other 2 steps followed suit, returning to their proper position. Carefully stepping over the second step trigger, Korjajak walked down the stairs and carefully stepped around the bronze spikes to a side wall. Here, it opened a hidden stone panel in the stone wall and turned a crank that retracted the bronze spikes so that they were hidden again. It oiled the gears and closed the stone panel. Before, it was a long hall with 2 pits, one on each side of a foot-wide stone beam. The stone walls on each side of this hallway, next to the long pits, were perforated in a complicated geometric design with dozens of dark openings. The stone beam was triangular in shape, with one flat surface facing up. Kneeling by the beam, Korjajak reached out and touched the beam. It rotated around a central metal axis point with ease. Still in perfect condition, it thought. Lying on its belly, it reached down the face of one of the pits until its fingers found a tempered copper lever and pushed down. With a soft click, the beam locked in place so that it no longer rotated. Walking down the now stationary stone beam, it stopped about halfway and moved its gonvalo up and down until it saw the thin, almost invisible filament strand that crossed the beam about 18 inches above the beam's flat surface. Carefully stepping over this, it walked with confidence to the stone door at the end of the hall. This door also had a large, circular bronze lock gilded in gold. It turned the combination, unlocking the door, and entered the ancient residence of its ancestors. Its great-great-grandparent had been budded in this residence, a place that had once, before the time of the Great Flooding, been alive with the songs of its people. It lingered a moment with this ancestral memory, then returned to the present. Turning to the left, it entered a dark, narrow hall that ran back parallel to the hall it had just walked down, with one wall pockmarked with openings into the narrow pit hall it had just traversed. Near the center, there was a human crossbow cocked and loaded with a fine filament attached to its trigger and running through a hole in the wall, out and across the beam it had just walked over. If a trespasser tripped the line out across the beam, they would be shot by one of their own weapons now mounted and waiting in the dark. For the next 2 hours, Korjajak worked setting up the second crossbow, a few feet from the first, loading it, and setting up a second filament line as a trigger release. Satisfied with its work, it sat back and nibbled a dried mushroom from a small pouch on its belt. With this new human weapon added to its series of traps, it considered what a hall like this would have been like when guarded by the clan's guards, who could fire their blowguns through the wall's perforations at any enemy in the exposed pit hall. But these human weapons would have to do. After eating and resting, it went down the spiral staircase into the lower levels of the site. Most of these lower levels were now flooded due to the changes that had been made to the planet at the time of the Great Flooding. The Great Flooding that had happened hundreds of years before, the humans came and invaded their world. It found the chamber it wanted and scooped up a dozen ancient gold coins from a stack abandoned centuries before on a stone table. Then it began to retrace its steps towards the exit. It planned to use these coins as bait to entrap the humans. Some of its people had wondered if humans ate gold since they seemed to desire it so much. But it seemed they were just greedy. Too lazy to mine gold, they sought to steal it from its people by raiding tombs and ancient dwelling sites like this one. Just before it crossed the triangular beam, it placed 3 gold coins on the floor, as if dropped in haste. He positioned them so that any human would see them, and not be focused on avoiding the barely visible trip lines that would set off the crossbows. At the base of the stairs, it lay down and unlocked the beam, allowing it to spin again with ease. A clumsy human would have to have perfect balance to cross the beam when not locked. A fall would end on hardened copper spikes, some 30 feet below, in the pit. It climbed the stairs, avoiding the second-to-top step. It carefully opened and locked the outer door to the ancient clan site. Then it crossed the tilt trap and worked its way through the rubble of the site's fallen outer ruins that were above ground. Near an ancient, crumbling archway, it placed 2 gold coins under some fallen logs and branches, to which it attached a thin line that was then tied to a small rock it had pried loose from the larger stones of the broken arch. If humans moved the branches and logs to reach the gold coins, they would pull out the small stone and release a much larger rock from the arch above that could hopefully fall on a human and kill or maim them. It sat back and studied the trap. After a few minutes of thought, it got up and adjusted the small stone wedged under the larger deadfall stone in the broken arch so that it would only take the slightest movement to dislodge it and cause the larger rock to fall. While it wanted to kill humans, it knew that it was necessary that the humans not know that its people still lived hidden in the mountains of this island. All of its kills must either look like an accident, or the bodies must never be found. The humans must appear to just disappear into the mountains, assumed to have been eaten by some wild creature. Leaving the site of its ancestral ruins, it followed a local stream down towards the human settlement. It planned to spend the rest of the daylight watching the human settlement, looking for behaviors that could be used against them. Near the village, Korya Jack watched a half-dozen small humans running and jumping off a small cliff into a pool of water. The very thought of being submerged in water like that made its skin crawl. Putting water on a cloth and wiping one's skin down was fine. Drinking water was fine, but being in water was an abhorrent thought. As it watched the small humans, it thought of a possibility, but before it could act, the small humans left the pool and returned to the village. It continued to watch the human village until dark. Once it was dark, it went to the stream bank and smeared mud on its arms and hands. Then it settled down by a small burrow it had seen and waited, totally still and motionless, its hands near the burrow's mouth. About 3 hours after full dark, the long fur-covered ears of a pitkatvat emerged from the burrow, followed by its head. Then the shoulders followed cautiously. Koryayak's motionless hand grabbed the creature by the neck with lightning speed, pulling the body out of the burrow and snapping the neck with a quick whip of the small body. It then settled down to pull the skin off and peel the meat to be eaten from the bones. After eating, it threw the creature's remains into the water to be carried away. It didn't want any scavengers to snoop around while it studied the human village. It then returned to its hidden spot to observe the village. The humans had not yet finished building a wall around their village. In the gaps between wall sections, they burned torches during the night. At times, the shadow of a human guard could briefly be seen. Koryajak also caught glimpses of a guard's silhouette against the sky on a wooden tower near the center of the village. It passed the rest of the darkness, sleeping and thinking of options to lure a dangerous predator into the human village before the wall was finished. By first light, it could already hear the sound of wood being chopped as the humans resumed cutting down trees. It saw this as another proof of how lazy and unintelligent these creatures were. If they were as intelligent as its people were, they would build with stone, not wood. Shortly after the sun was fully up, there was a loud commotion in the human village. 2 of the humans with long fur on their heads were pointing up the hillside towards where the ruins of Koryajak's ancestral home were, and making loud noises. A group of humans with short fur on their heads was gathered around the long-furred humans. There was a lot of gesturing and strange wails. Korjajak didn't understand the variety of colors and shapes among different humans. They must be genetically very weak to exhibit such a high degree of unstable variety in their shapes and coloring. Finally, 4 short-furred humans put on armor and gathered weapons to begin hiking in the direction of the ruins. As it began to move to stay ahead of the group of 4 humans, it noticed that 2 small humans followed behind the 4 as they headed up the hillside. Korjajak moved quickly back to the overlook it had used yesterday when it had watched the 2 humans clamber over the outer ruins of its ancestral home. As the 4 humans came into view, it was excited to see if they might be killed or maimed by the falling archstone as they tried to pick up the gold coins it had planted for just such an occasion. Korjajak experienced some disappointment when the 4 came into view. The leader in front seemed to be moving very carefully and pointing to scuffs in the moss where the other 2 humans had passed yesterday. They carefully moved forward when they reached the old archway. The leader of the humans seemed to point down to where the gold coins lay, then to the almost invisible line attached to the branches. It was shaking its head, and the other 3 stepped carefully over the area without taking the gold coin bait. This was very disappointing. Rather than taking the hidden stairs, Korjajak shifted to a new overlook where it could see the 4 humans as they approached the tilt trap in front of the main door into the ancient subterranean portion of the site. Under the direction of the lead human, the one with yellow fur on its face and head, they moved more cautiously and slowly than the humans had the day before. This leading human stopped and pointed out the blood trail of the human from yesterday. The one who had lost both feet when the tilt trap had come back down on his feet. This human even pointed to the blood smear out on the tilt trap where Korjajak had thrown the corpse. It stopped one of those humans with it from rushing out onto the trap. It pointed to the sculptured creature heads along the walls as it spoke to the other humans. It began to examine the carvings and had almost reached the carving that held the trap lock lever when there was a crashing sound and screams. The 4 humans rushed back the way they had come. Korjajak shifted its observation point again to see that part of the ancient arch had fallen with a small cloud of dust hanging in the air. The arm of a small human could be seen under the small pile of fallen stone. The 4 humans rushed back to the spot and began digging and tossing stones out of the way. The limp bodies of 2 small humans were gently lifted up by 3 of the humans. The yellow fur-headed one who had been leading stopped and looked around carefully in a full arch. Its focus was so intense that Korjajak ducked out of sight. This human acted as if it knew someone was there and watching. With its crossbow weapon held at the ready, it shouted at the surrounding jungle. Korjajak didn't know the words, but the tone made it very clear that this human was issuing a challenge and a warning of defiance. This human was going to be a problem. Korjajak continued to watch the human village for 2 more days, taking only brief breaks to hunt small game and gather mushrooms for food. It kept a special eye out for the human with the yellow fur on its face and head. For their part, the humans seemed to put an added focus on finishing the log wall that surrounded the village. There was a lot of wailing from the humans, and a small human was buried in the ground just outside the wall. No small humans came to the pool below the cliff to play in the water. On the 3rd day, Korjajak saw the human, with yellow fur and a black-furred human, take weapons and some armor, and head towards a meadow about 3 miles from the village that was a popular grazing spot for hornbuck. Korjajak circled the village and picked up their trail with ease. As it reached the meadow area, it moved away from the trail the humans had taken and found a tree to climb as a vantage point. The meadow grass was about 4 feet high, and it could see the humans a quarter mile ahead, crouching so that just their heads barely showed above the grass. There was a scattered herd of hornbucks less than a half-mile in front of the humans. From its position, Korjajak noticed something that the humans could not see. A Taltasu was creeping up on the same herd of hornbucks, to the left of the two human hunters. It thought to itself with satisfaction that the chisel-like jaws of the Taltasu just might kill the humans and save it the trouble. It definitely wanted to see that human with the yellow fur killed, and the sooner the better. Korja Jack was still watching the humans when the yellow-furred one rose and fired his crossbow weapon. The bolt hit the closest hornbuck, and it rose on its rear legs for just a moment before collapsing to the ground, almost hidden by the grass as the rest of the herd scattered. Both humans rose and sprinted towards the downed hornbuck. The yellow-furred one was drawing a large skinning knife as it ran, just after the two humans reached the fallen hornbuck to begin the butchering process. Korjajak saw the Taltasu creep closer, approaching the humans from behind them. It knew this Taltasu must be very hungry, being in a grassy meadow where its dark brown and green striped fur, designed for dense jungles, clearly stood out. Suddenly, the Taltasu jumped at the black fur-headed human, who turned slightly at the last moment, the creature's chisel jaw clamping down on the human's shoulder instead of his neck. The human let out a scream as the yellow-furred human turned and plunged his skinning knife into the body of the Taltasu, which then turned towards him as a threat. The black-furred human struggled to its feet and began running back along the trail through the grass, screaming in a wide-eyed panic. Korjajak jumped from the tree and sprinted towards the human's trail through the grass, pulling its blow-dart gun from its belt and loading it as it ran. It reached the trail just seconds before the black-furred human came into sight. The human froze in surprise for just a moment, during which time Korjajak put a poisoned dart into its exposed neck. The human dropped to the ground, convulsing for a few moments, then went still. Korjajak walked toward the human and retrieved the dart, then put the blowgun and dart away. It drew from its belt a leather half-glove with 2 gato teeth attached and fitted it on its hand. Then, leaning over the fallen human, it used the gato teeth attached to the leather glove to rip out the throat with powerful sweeps of its arm so that it would look like a creature had killed the human. As Korjajak surveyed the job to make sure it looked convincing, it tried to decide if it should go down the human trail in the grass to see if the yellow-furred human was alive or dead, or return to the tree to try and see what had happened at the site of the hornbuck kill. It had just decided to return to the tree when there was a sharp pain in its back and a crossbow-barbed dart tip erupted from its chest. It looked down shocked. Where had this come from, it thought. It then felt pain, and another barbed dart tip erupted from just below its ribs. It was hard to breathe. It was like having a wet cloth over its mouth. The pain was growing intense as it turned to see where its attackers were. 2 brown fur-headed humans who had just run up stopped in front of it. One thrust a spear into it twice. This was not supposed to happen, it thought, as its life went dark. Alfred and Peter had just run up. They stood looking down at the dead, blue-gray, hairless alien. I guess Eric was right. There are dwarfs still living on this island, Peter said. Who would have ever guessed? This must be why Eric insisted we follow his back trail on this hunt, Alfred replied. This thing sure did a number on poor Jared, though. Jared never did have much luck. Should have stayed in the city and not tried to help start a new town. Do you think this thing got Eric? Peter asked. I don't know. Let's go find out. This short story, written by Steve Simmons, is set on Planet Archipelago, the setting for a tabletop role-playing game. The game Planet Archipelago may be purchased at drivethrurpg.com.